Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Ruth Cadbury.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Ruth Cadbury.
On Monday, children and parents at St Mary's Catholic Primary School in Chiswick told me of their concerns about air pollution affecting children's health. This morning, the High Court ruled that the government's air quality plan is unlawful. What does the Prime Minister feel is worse, losing for the third time in the High Court, or 40,000 unnecessary deaths and the impact on children's health of the UK's unsustainable air quality?
Prime Minister.
The issue the Honourable Lady has raised about air quality is an important one, and that's why we've been taking action to improve air quality. But can I just say to the Honourable Lady that the way she has described the Court's decision this morning, I don't think properly reflects the decision that the Court has given. If I can just perhaps, Mr. Speaker, explain to the House, because we do welcome the fact that the Court has dismissed the complaint relating to 5 cities with major air quality problems, has found that we are taking appropriate action. They've agreed that the modelling we used to support the 2017 air quality plan is sound. They have asked us to go further in areas with less severe air quality problems. Where we thought a pragmatic approach was appropriate, we will now formalise that. But actually, on 2 out of the 3 counts, they found in the government's favour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Willenhall and Bloxwich want to see more police on the streets. I lobbied the Police Minister for funds to put more police on the streets. So will the Prime Minister join me in urging the Labour Police and Crime Commissioner to put more police on the streets instead of increasing his budget for back office staff by £10 million?
Well, my honourable friend raises an important issue, and he's right to speak up for his constituents in relation to this. And he's also right because, as a government, we've been keen to ensure that police are out there, not in back office jobs. More money is going to policing.
Order. Please. The questions and the answers must be heard, and I make no apology for repeating that the discussions here at PMQ should bear some resemblance to what the House is saying in relation to culture. We've recently had a report on harassment. Let's try to behave properly in these sessions. That means listening to the answers and listening to the questions. Both sides of the House have got to try to wake up to the reality that huge numbers of people outside this place, I couldn't care less about the press gallery, huge numbers of people outside this place disapprove of this sort of behaviour on both sides. Stop it. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The funding settlement for next year provides extra money for policing, which means that the West Midlands Police will receive an increase of £9.5 million. Now, of course, as my honourable friend says, it's up to the West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner, the Labour Commissioner, to decide how he spends that money. But I know that police forces can be more effective and productive, and I'm sure he's going to make his case very strongly to the Labour Commissioner.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Brexit Secretary assured the country that Brexit will not plunge Britain into a Mad Max-style world borrowed from dystopian fiction. Doesn't the Prime Minister feel he could set the bar just a little bit higher?
Prime Minister.
I'll tell you, as the right honourable gentleman knows, we're very clear that we're going to ensure that when we leave the European Union, we are going to be able to take back control of our borders, our money and our laws. I have to say to him, the only fiction around in relation to the Brexit and the European Union is the Labour Party's front bench, who can't even agree with themselves what their policy is.
Jeremy Corbyn!
One of, Mr. Speaker, one of her former Brexit ministers in the other place warned the Prime Minister that Britain will be walking a gangplank into thin air if she doesn't decide what she actually wants on leaving the European Union. In his speech, the Brexit Secretary also said fears about a deregulatory race to the bottom were based on nothing. So why then did his own department's exit analysis state there could be opportunities for Britain in deregulating areas such as environment and employment law?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he talks about what we actually want to achieve when we leave the European Union. I'll tell him what we want to achieve. We want to ensure that this is a country that can negotiate free trade deals around the rest of the world. We want to ensure that we have a good trade agreement with the European Union, and that's what we'll be starting to negotiate. We want to ensure we have a good security partnership with the European Union, as I set out in detail in my speech in Munich last week. But what we also want to ensure that this country takes the opportunities that will be open to us outside the European Union to boost our economy, to ensure that we're developing the economy of the future, the jobs for the future, more high-paid, high-skilled jobs for the people in this country. We're putting the people first.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, in December, the Foreign Secretary and the Environment Secretary were briefing that the Working Time Directive would be scrapped. Yeah. The CBI and unions are very clear that they're not looking for a bonfire of regulations, quite the opposite. The only party that wants to scrap workers' regulation protections are the party opposite. In her Lancaster House speech a year ago, the Prime Minister clearly stated, "I also want tariff-free trade with Europe." Now, a year on, she's downgraded that aim to as tariff-free as possible. Businesses and workers want tariff-free access to protect jobs. So why has the government abandoned that for as tariff-free as possible?
Prime Minister.
I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, the government has not abandoned its negotiating position in relation to this. We will be ensuring that we get that good, comprehensive trade agreement, new economic partnership with the European Union. But he also mentions workers' rights. I have been clear since I became Prime Minister that this is a government that will not only protect workers' rights, but enhance workers' rights. And let's just look at the Conservatives' record in government. Who was it? Which government was it that took action on 0 hours contracts? A Conservative government, not Labour. Which government is it that got Matthew Taylor to actually report on the new economy so we ensure workers get the highest rights? A Conservative government, not Labour. Which government is it that's ensuring that workers' voices are heard on the boards of companies? A Conservative government, not Labour.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Well, I don't know if she's had a chance to read the Daily Telegraph today, but 62 of her backbenchers want a bonfire of regulations, want to destroy workers' rights in this country. When the government's EU exit analysis... Mr. Speaker, when the government's European Union exit analysis was published, the Brexit minister said it does not consider our desired outcome. Could the Prime Minister take this opportunity now to tell the House and the country what is the government's desired outcome?
Prime Minister.
I'm very happy to. A bespoke economic partnership.
Jeremy Corbyn.
OK. So given the Prime Minister ruled out any form of customs union with the post-Brexit, can she explain how she expects then to avoid a hard border with Northern Ireland?
The Prime Minister.
The right honourable gentleman and others have asked this question previously. I've already pointed out in this chamber that the government published papers last summer which showed how we can deliver exactly that: no hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and a bespoke economic partnership with the European Union.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, the Foreign Secretary recently made a speech about Brexit, and he found time to mention carrots, spam, V-signs, stag parties, and a plague of boils. Not one mention of Northern Ireland in his speech. Mr. Speaker, we're halfway through.
Mr. Morris, calm yourself. It's not good for your health. It's only Wednesday, man. You've got the rest of the week to get through. I'm trying to help you. You should appreciate my kindness. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, we're halfway through the 6 speeches we were told would set out the government's negotiating position. So far, all we've had is waffle and empty rhetoric. Businesses need to know. People want to know. Even her backbenchers are demanding to know. But it isn't clear from today's exchanges this government isn't on the road to Brexit, Mr. Speaker. It's on the road to nowhere.
Prime Minister!
I think I have mentioned to the right honourable gentleman before that his job is actually to ask a question, not to make. But you know, I'm perfectly happy to respond to the points that he made. He said that we have not set out any detail. Can I suggest to him that he needs to think very carefully about the security partnership that we want with the European Union when we have left. I set out in my speech in Munich last week exactly what we want that security partnership to cover, because we believe in ensuring that we are maintaining the security and safety of people here in the UK, but also of people in Europe. And we are unconditionally committed to the safety and security of Europe. But can I congratulate the right honourable gentleman, because normally he stands up every week and asks me to sign a blank cheque. And I know he likes cheques, but really, that is terribly depressing.
Kevin Foster!
Come on, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Evelyn Fisher was killed when a car mounted the pavement, with tests done after the incident indicating the driver had an undiagnosed medical condition which would have needed to be assessed by the DVLA if it had been detected beforehand. What view does the Prime Minister take of the current system and rules for ensuring those who hold driving licences are fit to drive?
Can I say to my honourable friend that he has raised a very important point, because it is absolutely crucial. Of course, we want to ensure that people who are driving are actually fit to drive. And I know that the sympathies of not just my honourable friend, but the whole of this House will be with Evelyn's family and friends. The current driver licence system is designed to balance the needs of road safety with those of the individual. All drivers must inform DVLA if they have a medical condition which may affect their driving, and should discuss any concerns that they have with their own medical professions. We do take this very seriously, and we are committed to ensuring that those who are granted a driving licence are those who are fit to drive.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At least 194 people have been killed in the last 48 hours at Eastern Ghouta. Can the Prime Minister tell the House what discussions her government has had with UN colleagues since Sunday on enforcing existing UN resolutions calling for an end to sieges of civilian areas and attacks on civilians?
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman that he has raised an important issue, and we are appalled by the escalation of airstrikes in Eastern Ghouta, and are deeply concerned by the reports that have been coming through of the ongoing deliberate targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructures. This is in blatant violation of international humanitarian and human rights law, and we as a United Kingdom government certainly do call on the regime and its backers to cease this campaign of violence. They should respect international humanitarian law, protect civilians, and allow rapid and unfettered humanitarian access, because there is concern that I think it's something like 700 people who need medical evacuation are being refused that evacuation by the regime. We will be continuing to work with the UN and the UN Geneva-led process. And finally, I would just say that the UN envoy has our full support in the work that he is doing to try to bring an end to this by finding a political solution for Syria.
Ian Blackford.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for that answer? The bombing, Mr Speaker, is relentless. Doctors on the ground are treating pregnant women and babies who have lost limbs. It is estimated that well over 100 children have been killed since Sunday. The UN has issued desperate pleas calling for political intervention, stating that no words will do justice to the children killed, their mothers, their fathers and their loved ones. Will the Prime Minister show leadership and join me in calling for an urgent meeting of the UN Security Council to address the horrific genocide unfolding in Syria?
Prime Minister.
The United Nations has called on governments around the world to call out the action that has been taken and to be ready to stand up against that action. And that is exactly what this government is doing. We will be ensuring that we will be talking to our colleagues within the United Nations to ensure that the best possible approach that can be taken in relation to these issues. But it's not just about the Syrian government, it's about the backers of the Syrian government as well. And we call on all their backers, including Russia, to ensure that this violence stops and that those people who are in need of help are given that help.
Chris Green.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. De La Rue has been manufacturing and innovating in the UK for nearly 200 years, including at its factory in West Horton at the heart of my constituency. They're the only British company bidding to produce our new passport, the other two being French. So, will my right honourable friend commit to doing all she can to support our manufacturers, our innovators, and making our new blue passport truly British?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my honourable friend, I'm sure he's aware that this will be an open and fair competition, that I can't comment on individual bids, but I'm sure he will make his voice heard. But it is right that from autumn 2019 we will issue new blue and gold passports. That's always been the UK's colour of choice for our passports, and I think it is absolutely right that after we leave the European Union we return to deciding the colour of passports that we want, not what the European Union wants.
Angela Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituent, Claire Throssell, suffered terrible tragedy when her two children were murdered by their father in an arson attack on the family home, at the family home. This brave woman has since dedicated herself to campaigning for better protection for victims of domestic violence from the family courts and from the various public services concerned. Can I ask the Prime Minister, when is the domestic violence bill going to be published? And will it be as comprehensive as she promised when she announced the intention to legislate?
Prime Minister.
I say to the honourable lady that our thoughts are with Claire following this terrible tragedy that she has been through, and we do recognise the need to ensure that we are providing support for the victims of domestic violence. And as she has said in her question, there are many aspects to this issue. My right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, before she brings forward the legislation, will actually be issuing a consultation, because we want to ensure that we listen to all those who've been affected, so that we are dealing with all the aspects of this particular issue. This government is committed to working to support the victims of domestic violence, but also to working to ensure that we end violence against women and girls.
Andrea Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I recently visited a memory cafe in Driglington Methodist Church in my constituency. The cafe is open to individuals and their carers and help to provide support for the memory loss. I was touched by the dedication of these volunteers, and I'll soon be hosting my own MP's memory surgery, which will enable local residents with memory loss the opportunity to speak about issues affecting their lives. Will the Prime Minister take this opportunity to update the House what the government is doing to help those with dementia and congratulate the hard-working carers of those suffering with this progressive condition.
Prime Minister.
I'm very happy to join my honourable friend in congratulating those many carers who are looking after people with dementia, and also the volunteers who provide services both for people with dementia and for their carers. We are working with partners across the health system to ensure more people with dementia than ever before receive a diagnosis, to raise awareness, to get an earlier diagnosis, and to provide the care and support that they need. I'm also pleased to say there are now 2.3 million dementia friends across the country. We're doubling spending on dementia research, and I'm also going to make sure that members of the Cabinet are given the Dementia Friends training.
Anna Turley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night I attended a meeting of hundreds of Redcar residents who are deeply concerned about rising levels of crime and antisocial behaviour. Crime in Redcar has increased 18% since 2011. We've lost over 500 officers and suffered £40 million worth of cuts to our local policing budgets. Will the Prime Minister commit straight away to giving back the money for neighbourhood policing, and will she apologise to the constituents of Redcar and Cleveland who've had to put their hands back in their pockets through the precept to compensate for her massive cuts?
Prime Minister.
First of all, can I say to the honourable lady that it is good to see her back in her place in this House. As I said in an earlier answer to my honourable friend from Walsall North, what we are doing, we are providing extra funding for police forces. Now, it's no good Labour members shaking their heads and saying, no, you're not, because we are providing extra funding for police forces. And, of course, it is then up to the Police and Crime Commissioners to decide how that money is spent.
Scully.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the whole House, including my honourable friend from Bolton West, would join me in welcoming the delegation of French MPs up and watching proceedings today. The people from across the European Union have settled in each of the 32 London boroughs in the belief that they'll be able to build a life here on the basis of their EU treaty rights. So naturally they want certainty and a simple way of securing settled status. What reassurances can the Prime Minister give that a speedy, low-cost, low-hassle system, starting from the premise that they'll be staying rather than applying afresh, will soon be in place to allow them simply to get on with their lives, continuing to play an important role in our economy, our communities and our culture?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, I'm happy to join, as I'm sure Mr. Speaker does, the fact that we are have been joined in the gallery by a delegation of French members of Parliament. But he's raised a very important point about EU citizens who are living here in the United Kingdom. They've made a huge contribution to our country. That's why we want them and their families to stay. I'm absolutely clear that EU citizens living lawfully in the UK today will be able to stay. He refers to the process for applying for settled status, and I can assure him it's not going to cost more than the cost of a British passport. EU citizens will have a period of 2 years to apply. It's going to be a digital system, it'll be streamlined, it'll be user-friendly, and it will ensure that this is as simple and easy a process for people as we can provide.
Chris Bryant.
Well over 1 million people in this country are living with the consequences of acquired brain injury. And the great news is that thanks to the government's new trauma centres, 600 extra lives are being saved every single year. That is brilliant. The problem is many of these people are having their lives saved, but they're not getting the rehabilitation support that can get them to live independent lives all over again. Miracles can be done, but half the units have no rehabilitation consultant at all. So will the Prime Minister please get together all the ministers who have a responsibility in this area, not just health, but the MOD, the justice system, which is heavily impacted, the Treasury, and the Department of Work and Pensions, to make sure that every single person who has an acquired brain injury in this country gets the full rehabilitation that they need.
Prime Minister.
The right honourable gentleman has raised a very important point, and as he may know, there are 2 ways in which those rehabilitation services will be commissioned. NHS England commissions specialised neurological rehabilitation centres for complex brain injury, and they do that at a national level. But more routine rehabilitation is commissioned locally. But NHS England also sets out a series of guidance for those commissioners to support delivery, including for brain injury. But he has raised a very important point, and I will ask the Health Secretary to respond to him and to take up the issues, the specific question that he has raised.
Crispin Blunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I tell the Prime Minister how welcome the Police Minister's statement was yesterday at the urgent question, that he's going to help Alfie Dingley find a way through the regulations to access the medicinal cannabis that he needs. Could she not only ensure that the Minister's words go beyond the popular view of "I'm from the government, I'm here to help," but also join the majority of states of the European Union, of the United States, of British public opinion, and all the colleagues who raised questions yesterday to give British citizens the earliest possible access to the potential benefits of medicines derived from cannabis on a proper evidence-based process, and for the United Kingdom to get on the front foot in licensing all the medical investigations that need to be done to get us these benefits.
Prime Minister.
I know that the sympathies of the members across the House are with Alfie and his family as he's undergoing treatment. And of course, people with chronic pain and debilitating illnesses, we recognise, will always look to alleviate their symptoms. But we do need to ensure that if we are going to if medicines are going to be permitted to be used, that they have been through the most rigorous testing, that we apply the most rigorous standards before those drugs are used. And we believe that cannabis should be subjected to the same regulations that apply to all medicines in the United Kingdom.
Alan Brown.
Mr. Speaker, previously I've highlighted that each Scottish Tory MP cost Scotland £265 million. Now it turns out the Scottish leader is much cheaper, because £15,000 able to hire her out for a day at the Tory fundraising dinner. Now that same dinner, the Defence Secretary was in hire for £30,000, £2,000 bought the International Trade Secretary, and £55,000 the Prime Minister. Does she agree with me that although they'll sell anything that moves, it's time to halt the privatisation of the Tory MPs and they should go on with the day job?
Order. Forgive me, I was struggling to hear. Just before I ask the Prime Minister to respond, I need an assurance from the honourable gentleman that he's not suggesting that the presence of a Member of Parliament was bought, because if he is suggesting that, that is straightforwardly out of order. Is that what the honourable gentleman is saying?
Mr. Speaker, I was referring to a story that was in the newspapers.
I'm afraid that's not good enough. Forgive me, I have to make instant judgments. If the Prime Minister wishes to issue some sort of response, she's free to do so, but she's under no obligation. No. Andrew Bridgen.
Mr. Speaker, twice in the last 4 weeks, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission has had cause to write to the Labour Party regarding breaches of equality law. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that equality law must be applied equally, and they're there to protect all groups equally?
Prime Minister.
I'm happy to agree with my honourable friend on that point. I was in opposition when actually the Equality Act went through. We supported that Equality Act. It is there to ensure, exactly as he said, that people are treated equally.
Tulip Sadiq.
Mr. Speaker, the government's decision to leave Euratom and withdraw from the customs union could potentially limit our access to vital cancer treatments. The CEO of the Nuclear Industry Association,
Order. Let's just be absolutely clear about this. The honourable lady can resume her seat momentarily. This question, like every question, will be heard. The honourable lady will not be shouted down. And that is the end of the matter. So if some foolish person is seeking to do so, examine your behaviour and stop it. Tulip Sadiq.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The CEO of the Nuclear Industry Association points out that if medical isotopes which are used to treat cancer are delayed in reaching the UK, they could be deemed useless on arrival because of their short half-life. Will the Prime Minister explain to the House how she plans to prevent delays to cancer treatment due to her hard pursuit of a hard Brexit?
Prime Minister.
The honourable lady is wrong on two counts. First of all, what we're pursuing is a Brexit that will enable us to have that economic partnership which sees that freedom of trade across the borders with the European Union. But it is also the case, as we've made clear previously, that the availability of medical radioisotopes will not be impacted by the UK's exit from Euratom. The import or export of these radioisotopes is not subject to any Euratom licensing requirements. So our ability to import medical isotopes from Europe and the rest of the world will not be affected by our withdrawal from Euratom.
Sir Mike Penny.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for taking a personal interest in meeting myself and other colleagues from across the House in her interest to get justice for the Primados victims. These people went to their GPs in good faith and were given a drug which has ended up with the loss of life of their baby, abortions and disfigured young people being born. Is there any good news that the Prime Minister has for the victims of Primados so they can put an end to this terrible situation?
Prime Minister.
I say to my honourable friend that I was very pleased to meet him and indeed to meet my honourable friend, the member for Eastleigh, to discuss this particular issue. And I recognise that there are many individuals whose lives have been affected by this. There are very powerful stories of these individuals. I know this has been a concern across the whole of this House, and the concerns raised by campaign groups, not just about Primados, but some other issues like vaginal mesh and sodium valproate, I think have highlighted that there is an issue with our regulatory and healthcare system, and we are determined to address it. And I've been clear that we need to do better. I was very struck by the powerful stories I heard. We do need to see a faster, more understanding response to patients when they raise concerns. And if my right honourable friend can be a little patient, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, will be making a statement this afternoon, setting out his plans to the House for review on these issues.
Steve Reid.
Speaker, it's over 8 months since the terrible fire at Grenfell Tower, but thousands of people are still living in blocks with dangerous flammable cladding, including Cityscape in Croydon. Now, this dangerous cladding was allowed to go up because of flawed government guidance, and there's still, on average, one fire every month linked to this cladding. It's clear that this is the government's responsibility. So why is she running the risk of a second Grenfell Tower when she could act and take this dangerous cladding down?
Prime Minister.
Honourable gentleman, that over the years, under both Labour and Conservative governments, obviously the building regulations and enforcement have been looked at. The arrangements in relation to enforcement were in fact changed by the last Labour government. What we did immediately following the appalling fire at Grenfell Tower, what we did immediately was to ensure that all those local authorities and others worked with their fire authorities to inspect towers, to look at where the cladding was available. There aren't just issues about the cladding, it's about how it's affixed to the buildings as well. Action was taken by local fire authorities in those areas where they thought it was necessary to do that. That is why we saw, for example, in Camden, people having to leave their tower block while action was being taken. My right honourable friend, the Housing Secretary, has put in place that review of the regulations. It was urgently put in place, and action is being taken as a result of that review.
Douglas Ross.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday, after months of ignoring evidence from a wide range of stakeholders, the SNP agreed to pause their plans to merge British Transport Police into Police Scotland. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that during this pause, the Scottish Government must look at all options for the future of BTP when that's devolved from this Parliament to ensure that we get the best possible deal rather than these failed integration plans into an already struggling Police Scotland?
Prime Minister.
I say to my honourable friend that this is, of course, an important point. We as a UK government are committed to delivering the Smith Commission in full. As part of that, we are devolving powers over the British Transport Police to the Scottish Government. But for the #1 priority must be the safety of the public as they travel. So we will work with the Scottish Government to make sure that there is a smooth transfer of the British Transport Police to their responsibility. Whether or not the British Transport Police is merged with Police Scotland is, of course, a matter for the Scottish Government. But the Scottish Government...
Order! Mr. Wishart, calm yourself. You're supposed to be setting an example to some of your colleagues. You aspire to be a statesman, one century or another. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm tempted to say the honourable gentleman is a right example, but there we are. Can I just say that it is a matter for the Scottish Government as to what they choose to do, but I would urge the Scottish Government to ensure they are putting the safety and security of people who are travelling first when they make that decision.
David Linden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Prime Minister a question for policy that she's responsible for. Over the course of the last 2 months, this government has butchered Glasgow's job centre network. Will the Prime Minister look me in the eye and tell me that no more job centres in Glasgow are due for closure?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, he is perfectly right to ask me for questions about which I'm responsible, and I have the right, as I did previously, to comment on issues which we are taking up with the Scottish Government.
And what's more, I say to the honourable gentleman, I will be the judge of what's in order, and the honourable gentleman will accept the ruling. The Prime Minister was in order, and that is again the end of it. Somebody has to decide, and I've done so. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What we're doing in relation to the job centre services is ensuring that there's going to be no decrease in the level of services that job centres are offering people in Scotland. In fact, we're going to increase the number of work coaches across the country to provide more support to the people that need it. These plans are designed to retain the skills and experience of the DWP workforce across the country and to ensure that we not just protect but enhance the service offered to people.
Nigel Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister tell the international aid sector that despite the abuses that have come to light recently, that this government is committed to helping the most vulnerable and poorest people around the world, but the sector really does need to get its act in order?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my right honourable friend, this government maintains its commitment to helping the most vulnerable people around the world. We maintain our commitment to our international development budget, but we do want to work with organisations that meet the high standards that we expect. And the behaviour of Oxfam staff in Haiti was quite frankly horrific. It was far below those standards. But I'm pleased to say that not only has my right honourable friend, the International Development Secretary, shown immediate action by demanding assurances from all our charitable partners here and abroad about their safeguarding and protection policies. She's also and demanded those by the end of the month. Next month, DFID and the Charity Commission will hold an urgent safeguarding summit where they'll bring together UK international development charities with regulators and experts to look at the possibility of an accreditation scheme that can be used for aid workers, and later in the year to take that into the international arena. It is absolutely crucial that we continue our support through aid for those who are most vulnerable, but they also deserve to be treated by the same high standards that we would expect to be treated ourselves.
Smith Eulis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Mr. Ali Beg, was refused leave to remain because of a minor legitimate correction to his tax return, which the Home Office under Section 322.5 of the Immigration Act has deemed a threat to national security. Today there's a protest outside against this Tory government's policies towards highly skilled migrants, so my constituent is clearly not alone in this. My constituent's home is in Glasgow. He has worked hard and contributed to society. Why does the Prime Minister want to force him out?
I say to the honourable lady, I'm not going to comment on the individual case. The Home Office looks at the circumstances of individuals. There are rules and immigration rules that are in place, and the Home Office will make decisions accordingly.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The whole House will be well aware of the excellent work done by the Holocaust Education Trust. And in particular, the brilliant Lessons from Auschwitz project. But at the moment, the Polish Constitutional Court is considering a draft law which would make it illegal to refer to Polish death camps and also the role of Polish citizens during the Holocaust. Will my right honourable friend take up this with her counterpart in Poland to ensure that the families of victims and the survivors' words are heard, that history cannot be rewritten?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my honourable friend, I understand that this issue the government has already raised this issue with the Poles. What we should be doing is ensuring that nobody forgets the Holocaust. Nobody forgets the horrific inhumanity to man that was shown through the actions that were taken by the Nazis in the Holocaust. And I think the Holocaust Education Trust does very important work. The Education Centre memorial that is going to be placed here at Westminster will be a long-standing memorial to people and will also do that important job of educating people about the past to ensure that we never see such horrific crimes being committed again.
Eve McCabe.
How would the Prime Minister feel if someone pinched her car and it then cost her £200 to get it back? That's what's happening to hundreds of people. So why doesn't she allow the police to use proceeds of crime returns to recover legitimate costs and put an end to this state-sponsored secondary mugging of innocent victims?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman that a lot of work has been done on what the proceeds of crime can be spent on. He will have noted that the Home Secretary has heard the question that he's raised, and I'll ensure that this particular issue he's raised is looked into.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, 3 months ago I raised the case of a constituent distressed by the relationship between his 17-year-old daughter and her much older driving instructor. This week, the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency announced that a consensual sexual relationship between an approved driving instructor and a 16 or 17-year-old pupil would now be considered an exploitation of their position of trust, and any instructor involved will likely be struck off the ADI register. So can I thank the Prime Minister for her response, the DVSA for their action, and does my right honourable friend agree that this sets a strong example, and would she ask the Department of Education to consider adding driving instructors and other coaches to their list of those formerly covered in law by a position of trust?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend for having raised what was an appalling case, but from that, as he said, has come a change in attitude from the DVLA, which I hope will be of benefit to others who could have been put into that very difficult and appalling situation. And I will certainly ask the Department for Education to look at the point that he's raised.
Jill Furness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Sheffield, the Council's £11.1 million projected current overspend on children's services is the highest in Yorkshire and Humber and the second highest in England. This is clearly in correlation with the £350 million of cuts since 2010. What does the Prime Minister say to those children who need these vital council services but may not be able to access them because the Tories continue to cut council budgets so savagely?
Prime Minister.
As I pointed out earlier, in response to other questions, what we are doing is ensuring that we have done over the settlement period that local authorities do have more money to deal with some of the particularly difficult issues that they have to deal with at a local level. We do want to see and ensure that children are given the best possible start in life, but it is completely wrong to suggest that decisions taken at local level are all the responsibility of this government.
Ross Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is clear from academics, dog behaviourists, charities and trainers that electrocuting dogs does not help train them, but risks creating more detrimental long-term consequences for their welfare. And thank you to all the colleagues who came along to my event yesterday to sign up to the pledge to ban the shot collar. Therefore, does my right honourable friend agree with me that as dogs are man's best friend, it's time we showed some of that loyalty and friendship in return by banning the use, distribution and sale of these barbaric devices?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for raising this issue, and I know he has been campaigning long and hard on this particular issue. We've made clear in the updated statutory code of practice for the welfare of dogs that positive training should be used, and that any training that involves pain, injury or distress would breach the Animal Welfare Act 2006. But I understand that my honourable friend will be meeting the Environment Secretary to discuss this further.
Susan Ellen-Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Deputy President of the National Farmers Union has said that losing full access to the European single market could be absolutely disastrous for British agriculture. Does the Prime Minister agree with her?
Well, my position remains exactly what it always has been, is we are going to negotiate an economic partnership, a new economic partnership with the European Union, and I can assure the Honourable Lady that the interests of agriculture will be one of the considerations we take into account when we make sure that we're still able to have a good trade arrangement with the European Union, as well as improved trade arrangements with the rest of the world.
Thank you. Order.